Good morning, Beacon! Happy Sunday, April 11th. It is so good to be with you. I'm the Reverend Emilie Boggis, honored to serve as one of the co-ministers on our leadership team here at Beacon with Dr. Tuli Patel and the Reverend Dr. Robin Tanner. Robin, of course, is on sabbatical until May 15th. I am so excited to welcome the Reverend Michael Crumpler into our virtual pulpit at Beacon later on this morning. Reverend Crumpler is an ordained United Church of Christ minister who lives in Harlem, not all that far from Beacon's physical location. What I love about Reverend Crumpler are his passions. He is most passionate about intersectional ministry centered in blackness, queerness, HIV/AIDS, economic justice, and emotional well-being. And Reverend Crumpler has a message that we need to hear, beloved. As you know, April 4th was the anniversary of Dr. King's murder in Memphis. Today, Reverend Crumpler is asking us to consider, in the midst of our own difficult days, when and where is our mountaintop? So let us welcome Reverend Crumpler with open hearts and open arms, ready to be awakened in new ways, ready to become deeply centered and ever liberated. For Beacon, that is what we are called to do in this month of becoming. As the prophet Van Jones says, it's in that convergence of spiritual people becoming active and active people becoming spiritual that the hope of humanity now rests. And Beacon, we are people of hope. So welcome this morning. We begin our morning grounding ourselves in the promises that we make as a community of faith. As Unitarian Universalists, we are a covenantal religion. Get your mouth wrapped around that word, covenantal religion. While we have different religious backgrounds and beliefs, what unifies us is our covenant. It is the promises that we make to become spiritual people, becoming active, and active people becoming spiritual. And so this morning, I want to welcome Beacon members Nancy Skinner and Marcy Beidel. Welcome.
Good morning.
It's so good to have you here.
It's good to be here, Emilie.
And to really see you. I can't wait until we can actually see you, live or in person. Can't wait. So I am so delighted to have you here because, as a covenantal religion, we as a community adopted a covenant after a 2-year process, one that Nancy really helped lead in our community. And last fall, we adopted this covenant. And this is the first time that we are really saying it in worship, which is something that we had long dreamed to do. And I am delighted, Nancy, for you as a leader of this process, and Marcy, for you as a leader of our community groups to lead us in this moment. So just for everybody else out there, no matter where you are, I invite you to say the words of our covenant out loud with Nancy and Marcy. And I also invite you to find a word or phrase from our covenant that calls to you. You can find it in the chat in just a moment. You can even find a word that challenges you. Consider how you, maybe in the next 100 days, can lean into the promises that we speak in our covenant. And so Nancy and Marcy, I invite you to take it away.
Love guides this congregation.
Love calls us daily to acts of liberation grounded in anti-racism. We affirm that we live in the complexity of intersectionality and that building healthy and loving relationships is a spiritual practice requiring both inward and outward focus.
Thus, we covenant to listen deeply, speak compassionately, express gratitude, and embrace our unique diversity.
We endeavor to communicate honestly and with compassion, particularly when we are in conflict. When we hurt one another, we will try to make amends, forgive, and reconnect with an intent to repair, change, and grow.
Our purpose is to be radically inclusive, feed the human spirit, and heal the world. In celebration of the common purpose that unites us and with the aspiration of beloved community before us, we will do our best to abide by this covenant.
Enter, rejoice, and come in. Enter, rejoice, and come in. Today will be a joyful day. Enter, rejoice, and come in. Open your ears to the song. Open your ears to the song. Today will be a joyful day. Open your ears to the song. Open your hearts, everyone. Open your hearts, everyone. Today will be a joyful day. Open your hearts, everyone. Today will be a joyful day. Enter, rejoice, and come in.
Good morning, Beacon. Tuli and
Jermaine, welcome.
ready to light our chalice, symbol of our Unitarian Universalist faith. You should join us. The words are probably in your chat.
The chalice, the whiter holder, representing the gathering community here, and the flame that represents the light within each one of us.
We light this chalice for the light of truth and reality, the warmth of love and compassion, and the fire of commitment and promise.
We
Light this symbol of our faith as we gather together. So, Jermaine, a time for all ages. What is this thing?
It's our wonder box. Woo!
Tell me about it. What is this magnificent thing?
Well, this beautifully carved box is a gift from our partner church friends in Broke, Transylvania.
And I think Reverend Emilie hauled this back in one of her suitcases. She must have pretty
Wow.
big suitcases.
Interesting things come out of this wonder box. So, Tuli,
Shall we?
I wonder what is in our wonder box.
Hooray!
Earful.
This is Earful Gnome. Did you know that we don't just have humans of Beacon? We have gnomes of Beacon. Jermaine, tell us a little bit more about Earful.
Earful is a gnome that represents our fifth principle, and you could tell by her big ears that her idea is listening. We should all listen to one another to hear what is valuable to each of us and learn to communicate better. And our fifth principle is it talks about our ideas around listening and debate, which is the right of conscience and the democratic process within our congregations and society at large.
Yes, very important to speak up, to voice your opinions, and also to become better listeners. Jermaine, I wonder, are there ways to communicate beyond just with our words?
Oh, absolutely. There's sign language.
Oh, like this means thank you in
Mhm.
sign language. Yes.
There's body language. And there's our facial expressions. You can tell when someone's feeling something pretty much from their face.
Although these days it's kind of hard from behind a mask to tell what somebody is feeling, right?
Yeah, it's hard. And every person has the right to express themselves and to share what is on their mind and how they feel. Although it's getting harder nowadays, more and more for some people.
Yes, one of the most important ways we can express ourselves, particularly what we think and feel, is through our vote. And Jermaine, I think when you said it's difficult, you're talking about the state of Georgia, where it's becoming even harder for us to be able to say what we believe. They're just putting up lots of barriers for people to be able to vote. Kids, you should ask your parents and guardians what's
Absolutely.
happening down in Georgia.
Yeah, and sometimes it's frustrating and kind of painful when you can't express yourself. It's like you're climbing this really steep mountain and you don't know if you're ever going to get to the top.
Yes, and sometimes it might be so steep that you want to give up. So, Jermaine, I wonder what can we do so that we don't give up, so that we keep trying to climb that mountain?
Well, I think one of the best things to do is modeled by Earful. Earful has 7 other members in their family.
Friends!
Absolutely. So when you're climbing that mountain, doing it with people that are like-minded like you, makes it a little less difficult.
So, Beacon, remember your Beacon family, your friends who can join with you in climbing that mountain, in getting through the tough times, and also helping you vote. Here ends our time for all ages. Bye.
Each Sunday at Beacon, we invite you to light a candle of sorrow, joy, grief, and celebration. Maybe you are lighting a candle for forgiveness and repair. Maybe you are kindling a light to welcome a new day or new life. You are welcome to light a candle in your home, and we hope that you'll also lift up a name in the chat. As we begin the kindling of lights, we draw attention to the thousands who have died from COVID-19, the impact within our Beacon community and around the world. To date, over 2,870,000 people have died in the world from COVID-19. We hold a moment of silence for these lives. We also light a candle of witness for Jordan Davis, a 17-year-old African-American youth who was murdered by a white man following an argument over loud music on November 23, 2012. Jordan was a happy and generous teenager. He would often ask his mom to cover the cost of meals and outings for his friends when they couldn't afford it, telling them, "God's got it." He is also described as a very curious young man who liked to ask probing questions and challenge people's thinking. In the wake of his death, his mother, Lucy McBath, ran for the U.S. House of Representatives and won a seat in Georgia's 6th Congressional District. Speaking at the 2016 Democratic National Convention, she shared with the audience, "I still wake up every day thinking about how to parent him, how to protect him and his legacy, how to ensure that his death doesn't overshadow his life." May this ritual of kindling light together offer us a sense of community and shared commitments in our lives. Ashe.
May I be filled with loving kindness. May I be well. May I be filled with loving kindness. May I be well. May I be peaceful and at ease. May I be whole. May you be filled with loving kindness. May you be
In addition to his many accomplishments, Reverend Michael Crumpler also heads up Finding Our Way Home, which is a Unitarian Universalist conference for religious professionals of color. And Jermaine and I were fortunate enough to attend less than 10 days ago. It was a fantastic conference. And during that conference, one of the presenters reminded me of the importance of somatic practices. These body-based practices are as old as the ages, and many of us engage in them already. You might be doing yoga, or Tai Chi, or Qigong, or tapping, and all are focused on the movement of energy throughout the body. Newer methods like Feldenkrais or the Alexander system are also about somatic practices. Humans have always enjoyed dancing. This too is a somatic practice, centering, like the others, the internal experience of movement. Somatic practices are used to restore balance, especially for those who might be engaging in particularly hard activities, such as frontline workers, or if you're out on a protest, any type of activity that activates our limbic brain, the part of our brain that tells us to freeze or flee or to fight. Little wonder then that somatic practices are used in trauma therapy. There's a lot of science behind how somatic practices can also help us to activate and engage the parasympathetic nervous system, which is the nervous system that is in play when we are relaxed. While this morning we hope that our limbic brains are not activated, we can engage in somatic practices, make them part of our daily routine so that when we are stressed, we remember them and we tap into them to restore balance. In the Buddhist context, somatic practices are the very embodiment of what we are trying to do, because the body allows us to move out of the mind and into sensations where we can develop equanimity and focus that is necessary for balance. So this morning, we're going to learn four basic somatic practices that we can drop into at any time. We begin, as we usually do, settling into ourselves, taking measure of where we are, noticing our spines, our hands, the temperature of the air, and our feet on the ground. And then to signal to our body that we are dropping into a somatic practice, we take 3 big diaphragmatic breaths, expanding the diaphragm out to the side. And usually we breathe in and out through the nose. For this practice, we breathe in through the nose and out through the mouth, kind of making a sound when we breathe out, like a roar. So inhale 1, 2, and 3. And now shoulders up and down, up and down, up and down. Taking a beat, closing our eyes for just a few seconds to scan our bodies from the toes to our head, seeing where we're at. What does it feel like? Does it feel any different? Noticing without analysis, without judgment. And now, rising on our toes. If you're seated, just raising your feet on your toes. If you don't have the use of your lower body, then just flexing the wrists and dropping the wrists flat. Flexing and dropping. Up on the toes and down. Up on the toes and down. And part of that same exercise, rocking backwards on the heels. If you're standing, please stay balanced. Hang on to something. Back on the heels and down. Back on the heels and down. And once again, closing the eyes, scanning the body, noticing when you're at. And finally, placing your hands on your heart on an inhale and exhale, hands out. Inhale, hands to your heart. Exhale, hands out. Inhale to your heart. Exhale out. Rest. Gently close your eyes. Bring your attention to your breath, noticing it moving in and out of the body. With every in-breath, move your attention from your toes up to your head, and on the out-breath, from the head down to the toes. Inhale up, toes to head. Exhale down, head to toes. Inhale up, exhale down. And you are invited to take a deep breath in, gently open your eyes, and return once again to our sacred hour.
Hi, my name is Bettina Calori, and I want to share why Beacon is so important to me. When my daughter was 4, my husband and I looked for a spiritual home because we wanted a community for her, one based on caring. Like parents before us, we found a UU home too, because adults need beloved community as well. I am more than an employee and more than a citizen, as important as both those roles are in my life. Beacon is a place where I can center and recenter on how I am towards others and myself. I have been grateful for the virtual services, the sermons, music, art, photos, stories, and videos from members, all of it bolstering my spirits through hard times and keeping the feeling of community alive until we can gather in person again. At the college where I teach, I work on the Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Committee, and I feel that work affirmed and heartened by Beacon's commitment to the 8th principle and dismantling racism. At Beacon, I've connected with people in meaningful ways through community groups, and when we had to move to Zoom last spring, I gained the knowledge I needed to adapt the model for college students studying in isolation at home. Thank you, Beacon, for so much inspiration. The truth is, we create this community called Beacon together, you and me, us. Our mission comes alive through our relationships, our voices, our leadership, and our gifts. Now we move into a time where we give generously to support making that mission come alive in our lives and in our world. In a minute, you'll see ways to contribute to Beacon. We invite you to lean into this practice of generosity. I know firsthand it makes a difference. Thank you.
All we say to America is be true to what you said on paper. If I lived in China or even Russia or any totalitarian country, maybe I could understand some of these illegal injunctions. Maybe I could understand the denial of certain basic First Amendment privileges because they haven't committed themselves to that over there. But somewhere I read of the freedom of assembly. Somewhere I read of the freedom of speech. Somewhere I read of the freedom of press. Somewhere I read that the greatness of America is the right to protest far right. And so just as I say we aren't going to let any dogs or water hoses turn us around, we aren't going to let any injunction turn us around. Well, I don't know what will happen now. We've got some difficult days ahead. But it really doesn't matter with me now because I've been to the mountaintop. I don't mind. Like anybody, I would like to live a long life. Longevity has its place. But I'm not concerned about that now. I just want to do God's will. And He's allowed me to go up to the mountain. And I've looked over and I've seen the promised land. I may not get there with you, but I want you to know tonight that we as a people will get to the promised land. So I'm happy tonight. I'm not worried about anything. I'm not fearing any man. Mine eyes have seen the glory of the coming of the Lord.
Good morning, Beacon. It's an honor to have been invited to preach for you on this day, 1 week after Easter, 1 week after the 53rd anniversary of the murder of the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. During this much needed sabbatical of the Reverend Dr. Robin Tanner, whom I deeply respect and have gotten to know well through her work with the Poor People's Campaign. Bless you all as you allow her to get the well-deserved rest that she needs. I'm the Reverend Michael Crumpler, the LGBTQ and Multicultural Programs Director at the UUA, and I live in New York City, not too far from here, and it is a privilege to be preaching in New Jersey, my home state. Before we get started, let us pray. Spirit of life, may the words of my mouth and the meditations of my heart be acceptable. I had the privilege of being in Memphis on April 4th, 2018, along with thousands of others. The background image that you see is the bird's eye view of the balcony where his life was taken. As I stood there faintly listening to the many voices of those chosen to eulogize his death, I couldn't help but wonder, how could something like this have happened? How could someone so popular, so prophetic, so charismatic have been slain so publicly in broad daylight? As a matter of fact, we were all gathered there on the mountainside to commemorate the very moment that shots were fired. As I stood there, 50 years removed from the incident, all I could think of was, to what degree has what has happened impacted my life? What would my life have been like had he been allowed to live another 50 years? What would my life have been like had he allowed himself to keep quiet and not to do or say anything at all? I believe that is the question we must all ask ourselves when we consider the life and death of the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Because I believe these are the questions that he was asking himself. These are the questions that frame the context of the words he uttered when he said, "Like anybody, I would like to live a long life. Longevity has its place, but I'm not concerned about that right now. I just want to do God's will." So my question today is, what will life be like? This is the question that concerned King on April 3rd, 1968. What will life be like for sanitation workers, What will life be like for poor people? What will life be like for the GI drafted to die in Vietnam? What will life be like for the second-class citizen living in the shadow of power and wealth? Indeed, what will life be like for you and for me, 53 years removed from his vile assassination, due to take place the following day? The answer to these questions is to be found in his final words. He's allowed me to go up to the mountain, and I've seen the promised land. Mine eyes have seen the glory of the coming of the Lord. These words we are very familiar with, at least a few of us. They harken back to the prophets of the Hebrew scriptures, of Moses and of Joshua and of David, those who led their people to the precipice of deliverance. Moses led the Israelites out of bondage and into the promised land, then handed over leadership to Joshua, who then led the Israelites to the threshold of nationhood. Sometime later, David came along and established a kingdom, but due to the violence on his hands, he wasn't allowed to rule over a peaceful kingdom, and was succeeded by King Solomon. So what King is saying harkens back to the prophets of old. This idea of the mountaintop wasn't just a figure of speech. King knew what he was saying. We have to believe that he knew his days were numbered. One may even be tempted to believe that when he said, "We've got some difficult days ahead," he was speaking of the immediate days that would follow his life. That somehow deep within his soul, he knew that his days were numbered. And I don't doubt it, because to some degree, truth is deadly. Many of us, myself included, are not very familiar with the far outer limits of freedom of speech and the real implications of the things that we say. The kind of speech that is risky, the kind of speech that could cost us our lives. Our speech, our activism being somewhat sort of a popular activism is more concerned with a negative Facebook reaction or an obnoxious Twitter reply than the ultimate sacrifice. Rarely are we willing to speak in a way that would jeopardize our existence. And neither am I calling for that today. All I'm saying is that King, I believe, was well acquainted with the ultimate price that his words would one day force him to pay. And I say on today that because I say that because I don't believe that King's words were as immediately as prophetic as they may seem. "We've got some difficult days ahead" are the words that preceded the final words of the final speech of the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., delivered at Mason Temple in Memphis, Tennessee on April 3rd, 1968. This speech, arguably his second most popular, is known as the Mountaintop speech. When King said, "We've got some difficult days ahead," I believe he was foreshadowing the days that would have happened since that speech. Yes, these days in which we find ourselves, not just those immediate days, these days when we wake at 7, 8, or 9 a.m. to a justice system that puts us on trial for a murder that the system designed to kill us. Yes, these days. When King said, "We've got some difficult days ahead," we must concede that he was hip to the notion that the rights he was fighting for would be the rights that we would be fighting for. When we hear him say, "We've got some difficult days ahead," he had his eyes on the poverty that we are battling today as we face poverty levels that predates the poverty levels that he was fighting against in the 1950s and 60s. Yes, when King said we've got some difficult days ahead, he foreknew that the Voting Rights Act of 1965 and the Civil Rights Act of 1964 would not solely pave the way for the liberation of the Black masses in these United States of America. For these are the difficult days that are ahead as Republican state legislatures across the country have introduced more than 250 bills creating barriers to voting. Yes, when he said we've got some difficult days ahead, he was talking about the struggle in a society that refuses to call racialized hate what it is, and that chooses to close its borders to families seeking asylum from the economic devastation and the poor economic policies that we ourselves are responsible for. Yes, when King said we got some difficult days ahead, these are the days that he was referring to. But then he said, he's allowed me to go up to the mountaintop, and I've looked over, and I've seen the promised land, and I may not get there with you, but I want you to know that tonight, we as a people will get to the promised land. Mine eyes have seen the glory of the coming of the Lord. Which begs the question, what did he see when he looked over that mountain? By the time the sermon was preached, the Voting Rights Act and the Civil Rights Act had passed. Jim Crow was beginning to be dismantled. Schools were beginning to be desegregated. Perhaps he saw the beginning of the realization of the dreams that he had preached about at the March on Washington. I would argue that the realist King, while being the ultimate optimist, was not at all naive. For while we in the present time might be tempted to become overcome with despair as we wake up on this 8th day of the testimony, to see George Floyd's life on trial, and as we embrace political victory in the shadow of legislative defeat, and as we escape insurrection only to be gunned down in massage parlors and grocery stores, and as we tear down border walls only to see them replaced by the fear of the other, that we too have been to the mountaintop. We've looked over and we have seen the promised land. Like King, our eyes have seen the glory of the coming of the Lord. We can hearken back to see the glory of liberty and freedom and the victories that we have in our hand. I remember what it felt like on Saturday, November 7th, when the election was called. I remember what it felt like on Friday, June 26th, 2015, when marriage equality passed. I remember what it felt like on Tuesday, November 5th, 2008, when Barack and Michelle and Sasha and Malia walked onto the stage in Chicago's Grant Park after having received the concession from John McCain. I remember what it felt like when I received that second COVID vaccination on Thursday, March 25th of this year at 5:30 p.m. Yes, we've got some difficult days ahead, but our eyes have seen the coming of the glory of the Lord. We need not be overcome by grief. We need not be overcome by fighting. We need not be overcome by the one step forward, 2 steps back of this time that we're in. For we know there will be difficult days ahead. But may we also know and hearken back to the many good days that we've experienced, to the many victories that we have within our grasp, and forge ahead in unity and courage and faith. Amen. Ashe. May it be so.
With gratitude for the sacred time we have created together this morning, we head out into the world, into our weeks, with the words of Mickey Scott Bay Jones called Brave Space, for we intend to live out its call.
Together, we will create brave space, because there's no such thing as a safe space.
We exist in the real world. We all carry scars, and we have all caused wounds.
In this space, we seek to turn down the volume of the outside world. We amplify voices that fight to be heard elsewhere.
We call each other to more truth and love. We have the right to start somewhere and continue to grow. We have the responsibility to examine what we think we know.
We will not be perfect. This space will not be perfect. It will not always be what we wish it could be.
But it will be our brave space together.
And we will work on it side by side. Amen. Ashe. And blessed be.